What were you doing when the Twin Towers fell? I was a senior in high school in Long Island, about 17 miles east of the towers. There was an announcement asking anyone whose parents work in WTC to come to the main office. I assumed it was a shooting or another bombing like '93. We turned on the TV and watched it all unfold. I knew about 20 people that died that day and my parents went to a funeral every weekend for a couple months. The dust from the explosion seeped into our town over the next few days. I still remember seeing survivors getting off the train covered in ash. I just got back to my dorm after an 8 AM calculus class. At the time, my default web page was Yahoo, and the news list had a huge breaking headline about a plane hitting one of the towers. I turned on my TV, and within 2 minutes, the live broadcast showed the second plane hitting. My roommate and I sat and talked about how this wasn't just a weird accident, it was obviously terrorists, and shit was going to get crazy, and eventually the first tower fell, then the second. Classes were cancelled the rest of the day, and I distinctly remember the screams from a girl named Cassie just down the hall learning from her mom that her dad was on one of the floors above where the first plane hit and didn't make it out. She left for home the next day and never returned. My heart hurts for Cassie. I hope her family has been able to find peace. I worked for a day trading company. We had data feeds from individuals in the towers. One person that did trading news broadcasts pretty much said, "Shit, the other tower is on fire, I'm getting out of here," and left. Saved his life. I worked in Midtown. We had offices in the WTC. I remember women shrieking. It was crazy. I called my family to say I was okay. It was probably really early where they were. It was hard to explain on the phone what was happening. Guess that was shock. Ended up walking to a friend's apt so I wouldn't be alone. It was like a weird apocalypse movie with all of the office workers walking through the park in the middle of the day. The weirdest part was how there was a marked change from the morning office workers who were just walking with their jackets off, and then afternoon they starting showing up with more and more amounts of dust on them. I worked in a building about 1/8 mile from Grand Central Station. I was in my cubicle when a coworker yelled for us to get to the conference room. We all watched the carnage on an old tube TV that was used to watch work-related videos. This was followed by everybody rushing to phones to contact people who were working in the towers or around the towers. We were then evacuated because we were close to landmarks, the UN, Grand Central Station, the Chrysler Building. We were all thinking about how close we were to a possible target. Someone was near Con Ed, but would they hit the power station or the building where they run everything? Friend was in the UN. We knew that was bad. In social studies class in 7th grade, and someone came in and told us the World Trade Center had been hit by an airplane. I had no clue that was the Twin Towers until they turned the TVs to the news. I was in the same grade in the same class. Same. Wow, same. They told everyone not to turn on the TVs over the intercom shortly after, so I didn't see anything until I got home. I have a friend that lived in Queens at the time and in 6th grade. Before the students knew what was happening, someone came in the room and said that they were having a school trip to the World Trade Center. They asked the class if anyone had parents that worked there so they could maybe have them help with the tour. They lead the kids out and God knows what after that. I had a day of study leave and was shopping for clothes at a local market. I got home to find my dad absolutely losing his shit over the news. We're in the UK, and I had next to no idea what the World Trade Center was. I was about 18 and very naive, but realized pretty quickly it was a major deal after that. I was 11. I hadn't heard of the World Trade Center before the attacks. I knew very well what the Empire State Building and the Statue of Liberty were, but WTC was unknown to me. I live in Northern Europe. Even as an American, the World Trade Center wasn't at the forefront for a lot of people when they thought of New York City. If you're old enough to remember the '93 bombing or work in financial sectors, it's definitely a bit more significant. The bombing was a big deal at the time. Caught the L at the Graham Avenue station maybe a minute after the first plane hit. From that side of the street, all I saw was a large plume of smoke and thought, I bet I'll hear about that fire later. From the other side of the street, I would have seen the towers. Watch the towers fall from Union Square. Holy crow. Was USQ your final destination for that commute? Nope. Had to walk out. Across the Williamsburg Bridge. Stopped at a bar after crossing. Forgot a full pack of cigarettes. Many hours later, at a different bar a little further into Williamsburg, I ran into the couple who had been sitting next to me. They had my cigarettes. Getting ready for school, friend called me saying to look at the news. We ended up watching the news broadcast all day at school because my teacher said it had more historical importance than anything she was going to be teaching that day. Can I ask how the overall tone was in the classroom? Were people talking, crying, or was it dead silent? I'm assuming this is high school. I'm curious because I was 6 years old at the time, not aware of the gravity of the situation. What a crazy thing to watch such a pivotal moment in US history unfold while surrounded by classmates. I was in Brooklyn, New York in 2nd grade in school. Schools are built vertically up, and my classroom was near the top floors. We had a clear view at Manhattan and the Twin Towers from there. I just remember seeing fire coming out of one, and my teacher running out the room screaming. We were all picked up by our parents as soon as possible, and by the time they picked me up, 30-45 minimum later, there was ash and debris everywhere. For anyone unfamiliar with New York City geography, Brooklyn is just across the river from where the Twin Towers were, so looking out your window to this is like a front seat view. I was in 3rd grade, in a commuter town north of the city. The principal of our school went to every classroom and told us she has to tell you all something I hope to never have to tell you again after the first plane hit. With the second plane they simply whispered it to each teacher. The teachers knew that 90% of the kids in our school had at least one parent working in the city. They knew some kids weren't going to be picked up at the end of the day. I didn't understand the gravity of what had happened for days, but to this day I have a fear of tall buildings falling or loud planes flying overhead. I can't imagine what it would have been like to actually witness it firsthand while on the top floor of a building at such a tender age. I was at work as a chemist when someone came into the lab and asked if we'd heard the news that an airliner had crashed into one of the towers. I remember it was a beautiful sunny fall day. We put on the news, and the rest of the morning was surreal. Once the towers collapsed, we were sent home for the rest of the day. Stationed in the UK. Had a full base recall. Recalled all aircraft from their sorties. Waited around a few hours for briefings. Then got orders to prep the aircraft ready for deployment. Aircraft were F-15 Strike Eagles. It was a very long day. Edit. I was not a pilot. I worked on the aircraft. My tech school instructor was working bombers at the time. He said they were doing a live weapon exercise that morning when they were unexpectedly directed something along the lines of cancel exercise, leave the bombs on, await further orders, this is not a drill. Jesus Christ, just reading that sentence gave me chills. I can't imagine the thoughts that might come across your mind when you hear this is not a drill. I was leaned up against one of those big tree planters outside the Paramount building on Broad, 30 blocks from Ground Zero, smoking a cigarette to try and calm down after the second plane hit. I felt the ground shake through the planter and rushed back in to find the first tower had fallen. It was one hell of a day. How far did you have to walk to get home? My cousin said he found a guy closing down his bike shop and offered him significant sum of cash. Cousin worked in finance midtown to buy a bike to get home, as he knew he was going to have to walk home to Jersey otherwise. I took a professional certification exam that morning. When my exam began there were reports of a light aircraft that had hit the World Trade Center and that fire department units were responding. When I came out like 3 hours later both towers were down, and the whole world had changed. The whole world had changed. It really did. I think future historians will pin that date as the day that a new era started. It was definitely the end of the 90s in my mind. I was in math class when someone went running through the hallway screaming we had been attacked and the towers were hit. Went through the entire day of school, which in hindsight was odd, since we were not far away on Long Island. Several teachers flat out told us that regardless of what happened, school was happening and we were to pay attention and learn. Sleeping. My dad was a diplomat on his way to a conference in Geneva. He called us from the airport in Singapore to tell us to turn on the news because there'd been a terrorist attack in America involving passenger flights. He said that he wasn't sure if his flight would still be taking off, but that he loved us and he'd called us if and when he got to Geneva. So did he get there? I imagine 9/11 would be very interesting from the POV of a diplomat. I can't really recall the exact timeline after that. I think he stayed in Singapore for either 1 or 2 nights in case he had to come back to Australia. But then he left for Geneva and was gone for 10 weeks. He said sitting in an airport watching it live on the news while waiting for his flight was one of the most eerie experiences of his life. I woke up and uncharacteristically turned on the news. I was pretty shocked by what was happening, but I got in the shower and went to class. When I arrived on campus, I was shocked more by the fact that everything had stopped. There were no classes happening. Just people standing around, either glued to the news or crying. My history teacher turned the TV on as we watched the planes fly into the towers. Little did we know we were watching history live. Had a half day of school because the county fair was that week and it was all you could ride wristband day. Most of us were pissed because none of our parents would take us to the fair, but we were too young to realize the gravity of the situation on that day. I was in 9th grade American history first period as we started hearing about what happened. We lived 20 minutes from our state capital, IL. A lot of the kids' parents worked in that area and left work to come get their kids and go home, not knowing what was coming next. They didn't know if other cities would be targeted, and there was just a lot of fear going around. With some kids going home, our classes weren't cancelled, but they gave us filler work to keep us busy. It was a blue bad sky of a day. Not a cloud in sight. I was studying in the computer lab at Southwest Texas State Salkeck Library for an art history exam. A girl sitting at a terminal across from me said a plane just hit the WTC. She had seen a Yahoo News update. There was no video yet. We all figured it was a small Cessna type aircraft. We couldn't have fathomed that it would be a large jetliner. About 15 minutes later I was heading across the quad to class in the old main building. There were TVs set up everywhere with people standing shoulder to shoulder watching. It was about this time the second plane hit, and the gravity of what was happening set in for all of us. Our exam was cancelled. I headed home. I got there in time to watch the first tower fall with my roommate and his girlfriend. I had just visited WTC Building 2 in May of '01. We visited a friend of my father's office on the 102nd floor. The elevator would stop every 20 floors or so, and you would get a glimpse of the activity on that floor. The amount of people present was staggering. The memory of the crowds in that building was front and center while watching those events play out. What the first responders were able to do that day was an honest to God miracle. That morning I drove to work listening to the Smith and Barber morning show on WPLR radio. They were discussing the play The Vagina Monologues, which I had seen, so I called into the show to talk about it. My ex-husband told me later that he heard the show, and I was the last call they took before the first plane hit. Went into the office and my coworker came over to my desk and told me that a plane hit the towers. We were only about 100 miles away from New York City, and I was puzzled since it was a spectacularly clear, sunny day, so why would a plane have gone off course? A little while later the second plane hit and everyone started freaking out. CNN and other websites were frozen, so I started reloading the BBC site, which wasn't as busy, then gave up, and we gathered around the TV in the conference room and watched the towers fall. I called my mother, who lived near New York, and advised her to stay off the road. She didn't listen and got stuck in a huge traffic jam. By 11 AM they sent everyone home. I didn't want to go home and be by myself, so I hung out in town. That afternoon I had a scheduled appointment with my therapist, and she hadn't cancelled, so I showed up. Poor therapist, it was her birthday. Sleeping, then my roommate woke me up. Your stepmother is screaming on the answering machine. I woke up, called them, and watched TV all day. Have family out there as well. Thankfully they were fine. Hours later my roommate came downstairs after waking up. What's happened? I told him I think we are at war, but I'm not sure with who. Wow. This was the feeling, we are war. But with whom? So scary. That was exactly the feeling. I was 20 and was sent home from work. I worked in telecom, and communications are usually a prime target in war. This was after the first plane. I drove home and watched the second plane hit, and it dawned on me that at 20 years old I would end up fighting in a war. I had no ambition or desire to join the military, and was certain there would be a draft once we figured out who we were fighting. I ended up joining a couple of years later, and have now served for 17 years, 2 deployments, and I expect another, supporting the same efforts. It has absolutely changed everything about my life. Just finished failing a college exam, and was walking back to my apt and thought, at least the weather's nice today. Not a cloud in the sky. Girl I knew came outside to tell me what was happening. No one was watching in my apt, but they were listening to the radio for live updates. I was like, guys, this is huge. This is huge. Then I turned on the TV and we saw the second tower fall. To this day, whenever the weather's really nice, that thought crosses my mind. I'm the same about the weather. Some days just look like that day. Sounds odd, but I totally get what you mean. They had already herded the entire campus into one room and we were watching it on television. When I got to school that morning, my science teacher already had it on TV, and I thought it was related to the paper I had just written on the construction of the towers. My aunt worked across the street from the WTC, and my cousin's teacher told her that her mom was dead. My aunt was not dead, but she had a really freaky story. My uncle, her brother, had just dropped off a whole moving truck filled with furniture around 4 AM at the WTC, so he slept through the whole thing and got woke up by coworkers who thought he was dead. They took my aunt off Manhattan by boat. She was surrounded by burn victims. I'm from Queens, New York City. I was 11 and in 6th grade English class. TBH, I started junior high literally just a week or so before. We were just starting class when another teacher came in and told our teacher about a plane hitting one of the towers. After the second tower and the Pentagon got hit, we ended up moving to the gym and our parents came to pick us up. I remember a lot of crying kids and adults because many of the teachers had spouses who were first responders. My dad came to get me, but my mom was trapped in the city and ended up walking from her job in Manhattan, I think she worked by Union Square back then, into Long Island City in Queens via the 59th Street Bridge. We met up with her somewhere on Northern Boulevard, I think around 31st Street. I don't remember a whole lot of specifics, but I do remember a huge crowd of people walking down Northern Boulevard, and a massive plume of smoke that seemed to cover the sky. It was extra jarring, because it was actually a beautiful and clear fall day that day. Something I remember vividly was that a friend of my dad's came to our house later on that day, and he had been near ground zero. He had this really shaken expression and was absolutely covered in dust. I really shudder to think about that, now that I'm older and I know what all that dust was made from. I was a freshman in high school. I went to school with the first plane having been struck, watched the TV with my first period class. Second plane in the tower collapse was seen with my classmates and a horrified teacher. PA comes on, and sends all students home immediately. I walk home alone and watch the news until my mom and dad get off work at around 3 PM. Very surreal day for me. Several news people were speaking, as if a war was starting on our soil, and I was just sitting in a living room with the door locked. I was in my 6th grade science class scraping off gum from under the desks we were in before class detention. The teacher from next door called our teacher over, and after a brief conversation, they led us students over into the next room. We sat down in front of the TV and we watched the story unfold. While we sat there, we watched people jumping out of the building trying to use trash bags as parachutes. The TV hosts were detailing the live event and trying to make some sense out of it. They were very upfront when stating that the trash bags would never work to help anyone down. We watched the second plane hit and our teachers cried before sending us back to our seats to start the school day.